So today we're going to talk about parenting from an Islamic perspective, and specifically focusing on the themes that we've been talking about: God, self, and society. So God-conscious parenting with self-awareness within a society disconnected. So this is what we're going to cover. We'll talk a bit about parenting in today's world. What are some of the challenges? What is the context that we're dealing with in parenting in the contemporary world and society? Then looking at guidance from the Islamic tradition to put this in perspective and get direction on how we can understand adapting our approach to parenting for the current times, and really bringing this into self-awareness as a parent. So how do we become self-aware parents in our parenting style? And then we will end with some practical tips and tools to feel like there's some things that you're taking away of actual implementable things that can help, inshallah. So these are some common phrases and complaints that I hear a lot from parents. Some of them may be familiar to some of you, but my kid doesn't have a Muslim identity. She doesn't hold our same cultural values. He doesn't listen to me. He's disrespectful. I never talked like that to my parents. And she spends more time with her friends than she does with our family. And when we look at this and we understand that the things that a lot of parents are struggling with, particularly Muslim parents trying to raise their kids as Muslims to have a connection to Islam, but living in the Western world in a non-Muslim society, even outside of that challenge, we have parents today are struggling with trying to understand how do I have a connection with my children and not feeling like, well, maybe I either have bad kids or I'm a bad parent. And oftentimes we read books and we go to courses and we try to learn all kinds of different parenting techniques. And it's always about how can you learn a different skill to be a better parent to fix the problem, either the problem being the child or the problem being us as parents. And I would like us to shift the perspective and realize that a lot of what people are struggling with as parents dealing with children today is not because they're bad parents. It's not because they don't have the right parenting technique, and it's not necessarily because their kids are bad. But it is the context with which we're parenting in this world, which is very, very different than it ever has been. So the challenges of parenting in today's world are such that we're up against a huge force that is in many ways outside of our control. But particularly if we were to focus on those of us living in the Western world, there is this information overload, right? So children are constantly bombarded with all kinds of information, having access to information at any moment. So we have to understand that they're getting all of this information, they have access to more than ever before, and communication has increased, right? All of these social media apps, people are communicating all the time, they're in constant contact with their friends, they're in constant contact with networks, but there's very little connection in the communication. Often what we communicate for as human beings is to have a sense of belonging, connection, resonance, reflection. And in the type of communication that kids are involved in, it's lots of surface level exchange of information without much connection. And one of the things that is the biggest challenge is that for the most part, children are peer-oriented. And what that means is that there is, in a society where we are oriented towards individuality and everybody is working and everybody is busy, kids spend a lot of time with each other. So they go to school all day long and they're with each other. So in their classes, sometimes they're learning, but then in between, on recess, in break, and then now after school, because parents are working late, there's all kinds of activities that they're doing after school with each other. And then there's all this pressure for peers to hang out with one another. And we think that this is a positive thing. They need to be socialized. But essentially, what's happening is that they are oriented towards their peers. They're getting cues from their peers. They're learning life lessons, learning how to understand the world, how they identify from people who are immature, people who are their same age, have no more life experience than they have no more hikmah, no wisdom, right? And so they're missing out on this natural aspect of our guiding them. They're guiding each other. And this is happening more and more because of the context, because of the society and the way that it's oriented. And as we know in today's world, amidst that culture, there is a lot of talk about identity politics, fluid identity. Everyone gets to claim themselves and define their own identity without a sense of a deeper identity, whether it's as a human being and what that means, or as a Muslim and what that means. It's all sort of open for discussion, and there's a lot of information that is going to influence that process of what does it mean to know the self, what is the self, right? It's this big, huge, wide open world. And underneath all this disconnection, it's really disconnected from natural order. So much of our lives in this contemporary world, we're living in human-made environments. We're very sedentary. There's a lot of orientation to screens, less to humans. Even when we connect with humans, it's often through a screen. We spend less time outdoors, and we're disconnected from the natural rhythms of family and identity that provide a natural way of growing and being balanced as a human being. So if we look at what parenting either used to be or is in some context in traditional society, and by traditional society, in our context, we're speaking about Muslim cultures, but this really goes across the board with traditional societies. Things tended to be more simple, less access to lots of information and lots of ways of being and lots of different perspectives. Things were what was relevant to the immediate environment around. And there was a lot of human connection, meaning so you would have this village, people would, you would, know your butcher and know the person who's selling you vegetables rather than going to a big box store where you're getting everything from an indescript thing or getting food delivered to your house. And so there's a lot of engagement for children as part of a society connecting with people. Even when they would leave the house, they would go to the corner store. The family knows the person working there. Maybe they call them uncle. There's a shared value with that person. There's a context of, hey, where's your mother? I know she's working right now. Are you okay? There's this checking in. And we tended to live in traditional societies with extended family. We have grandparents around, elders, cousins, either down the street or sometimes in the same house. So it's not all on the two parents or one parent to provide this context of a sense of family and identity. It's this village, right? This notion it takes a village to raise a child is a reality because the child grows up in context of things and people that are reflecting back who they are, where they are, value systems, and being acknowledged and valued and known. And so what that does is it creates a more solid sense of identity. It creates a sense of groundedness in who I am in the world. What is my connection with my society, with God, with self. And they tend to, when you live in a small context, there is often shared values. It's not this sort of wide open context where everybody, everybody has different values, and those are all up for grabs and up in the air. And there's a lot of more living outside, a lot of connection literally to the natural world. And because of being connected to this fitri way of living, it puts them in context with how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala positioned us to look to the natural world, to find signs to our nature. We find our nature in nature. So it's not, if we were to say, well, that seems like a lot better picture, right? This traditional society seems better. And I think in many ways it is. But is it realistic to say, okay, well, let's go back in time. Let's do it exactly how they did back then or the way it is there. It may not be possible for us. Where we're living, we don't have the context in place, and a lot of the things wouldn't necessarily work. So it's a new time, it's a new context, and it calls for new measures. And so what that means is looking to the wisdom of this traditional ways, but understanding how do we bring that into context in the contemporary world. And so when I say it's not your parents' parenting, often we're going by the template of what our parents did. And oftentimes if they're around, we have our parents as grandparents saying, just let them be, just have it do that. We never did that when we were growing up, right? And they forget all of those other things that were in context. They had the village, they had the connection to people, they had the connection to family. Even if you let the kids do what they want to do, the guy at the grocery store is going to take care of them. Auntie's going to take care of them. The society that holds the values is going to hold that in place. Whereas if we just sort of do the same thing in the same way, it's going to be a very different outcome. And we can't just sort of let them be on their own and expect that it's going to transfer in genetics, right? This is something that has to be cultivated. It's something that has to be nurtured. And we're going to have to not only be conscious of this and self-conscious, but actually go out of our way to put things in balance because we're living in this really unnatural situation for families growing up. And so we really need to reorient our parenting to relationship. And we'll look at some examples from the prophetic model of parenting in the Islamic tradition that it's all about connection and relationship. It's all about the children having an attachment to their parents and their family that allows for their sense of self and their sense of connection to God being sustainable in the future. And this is how we instill Muslim identity. It's not behavioral. It's not, hey, do this, drop them off at the mosque, make sure you wear hijab, read Quran. These are behavioral, right? These are external. And often, if it's only about behavior, it's not going to stick. It has to be something that is on a heart-based connection of knowing who they are and having this place of purpose in the world that is much more about behaviors. The behaviors are things that follow from the inner state, essentially. This, I think, is really important to look at. This saying by Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, do not raise your children just as your parents raised you, for they were created for a generation different than yours. I think this is something that a lot of Muslims, we think, well, we just do it the way that we've always done it, right? Because that's how our parents did it and we take it on, right? Islam is a living tradition and times change. And so what we're trying to do, like everything we talk about in Cambridge Muslim College, is the tradition has the wisdom, it has the core, it has the first principles. We need to understand that from our current context, and it's going to be different than it was for people in the past. We're not looking to the past, we're being in the present and looking to the future and implementing the wisdom, the traditional wisdom. So if we look at guidance directly from examples of the Prophet ﷺ and his companions, this is where we can find direction. Because like I said, we can't do things the way that things were done before, but the beautiful thing of the Sunnah, the Prophet ﷺ was the perfected character. So that means everything he did was the perfect way of doing it for any time. So when we look at his example, we can understand how do we take the core of what he's showing, not just in behavior, but in way of being, and apply that to our current context. So if we look at some examples, all of these examples are about connection and love and making there be an unconditional sense that the child is acknowledged, is safe, and is loved. So the Prophet ﷺ, every time before he left the house, he would kiss Fatima on her forehead. This is saying, knowing that when a parent leaves a child, there is a separation, there's anxiety. Children need to feel attached to their parents. And we'll talk about why and how deep that is for our understanding and our attachment to God and our connection with Allah. But so this is a behavioral thing. He's kissing her on the forehead, but it is instilling this sense of, I love you, I recognize you, and I'm leaving, but I'm planting this physical, intimate connection on your forehead as almost like something that's going to remain until he returns. A beautiful gesture that's very simple, but that does a huge amount to keep the child's heart connected and attached to us. And he also kissed his grandsons. In that time, and even in now, there's a lot of sense that men, shouldn't be intimate or affectionate. And he was very affectionate with boys, with his two grandsons. And he was asked about this. Why do you kiss your grandsons? And he says, whoever does not show compassion will not be shown compassion. It's really fundamental to have the parent-child relationship based in compassion, meaning unconditional love that is not attached to behavior or achievement, but just love. I'm here for you, and I am constantly reminding that there's this human connection. And we know from the Anas ibn Malik said that who was in the care of the Prophet ﷺ, said he never blamed him or never got frustrated with him. Can you imagine? As a parent, it's very difficult not to get frustrated with children. And oftentimes we think that that's our job, is to get frustrated with them, to tell them what to do to be better, or to not do this and do that. And we express it in sort of firmness because we have this sense of discipline, meaning I need to teach you. But what we learn from the Prophet's example, ﷺ, is that there wasn't a need for showing frustration and sort of this anger almost and firmness in direction that is based in love and compassion. And Anas ibn Malik said, I have never seen anyone more kind to one's family than Allah's messenger. So this kindness to family really being the basis of it. And I know we think, okay, this is the Prophet, ﷺ, he can do this. This is not easy for us to do, just maintain kindness. How do you do that? It's not necessarily easy. But I think when we understand this pedagogy, this way of parenting from an Islamic framework, we need to understand the conditions first. And I think this is a really important framework for us to follow from Ali ibn Abi Talib, radiallahu anhu, said, play with them for the first 7 years, then teach them for the next 7 years, and then befriend them for the next 7. Now, subhanAllah, this aligns with what we know of developmental psychology now. But it's so much deeper even. Because in this, you may have heard about attachment parenting. This is a style of parenting that really understands the need for the child to be attached to the parent. And in a secular approach to that, that is still real and that still works, but there's a missing link of, well, why? Why is it so important for the child to be attached to the parent? Ultimately, the idea is for the child to be led to rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when we come into this world, we are reliant on our parents. And this becomes the way that we are going to be led to learning to rely on Allah. So what we're doing from the entire developmental process of the child is putting the foundation in to lead them to have a solid connection with Allah and understand themselves as a servant of Allah. I know it's a lot of pressure as a parent, but this is the reality. And so if we look at these three stages, I think it's something that we need to have in the back of our mind, because as parents, often we just have a notion of this is what parenting is, and we apply it to no matter what age they are. And we think, oh, it's my job to make sure that they do what they're supposed to do. So I'm going to try to teach them. Everything's always about a lesson. I'm teaching. But you try to teach a child who's under the age of 7, and it's going to backfire for the most part. Why? Because that's not the way that their nafs, their self, is oriented into the world. They're not in a state of being open and receptive to receiving the teaching. They're in a state of exploration and play. And so it seems interesting that somebody, at this status of righteousness, of somebody like Ali ibn Abi Talib would say, play with them. For 7 whole years, play with them. Why? Is because when you play with a child, when you get down on your knees and you're face to face with them and they feel this sense of you're in their world, what you're doing is establishing safety with the child. The more that you play with them during this phase of their life, what you're doing is putting money in the bank for them to listen to you later on in life. That's how we need to be looking at this. It's not play like lahu. It's not wasting time type of play. It is building a foundation of them being on your side, being able to take your direction. If you haven't, made an investment for those 7 years of play, of being at their level, of giving them your attention and time, and they feeling like they trust you, then when it comes to the next stage of 7 to 14, you're going to have a difficult time trying to guide them, because they don't see you as safe, they don't trust you as much, and there's going to be a bit of a resistance to what you're trying to teach them. So this second stage of 7 to 14 is when the nafs is developing and starting to understand themselves as a separate entity, as an individual, but before they sort of solidify. They're still open, they're still receptive. You can still give them direction and they won't sort of resist. Whereas, and this is, it's not the day they turn 7 or the day they turn 14. There's a range for different children. But on the other side of age 14, you try to teach a child in this way, and they're gonna feel this need to back away from you. And the more that you try to teach them, the more you try to give them, it's going to separate you from them. Then you're gonna start to lose the power that you have as a parent. And I don't mean power by dominance, but the power that we need to have, that we naturally have as parents, is to be the guide for them. Children need to feel needy of us. Why? Because we are all needy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the natural fitra, natural state of ourselves, and we need to let that be fully come into fruition in order to align ourselves to be an abd Allah. But first, and it's not about being an abd, it's not being a servant of your parents, but it's being able to be guided by your parents to have them feel like they're looking to you for the cues and they're looking to you for direction. And that dynamic of them choosing to look to you because they want you to guide them is the power that we need to sort of reinstate as parents. We have to set boundaries. The hierarchy of the parent needs the power to guide. They need guidance, right? But that guidance is only going to be effective if the connection is established first. So what this means is connection before direction. So if you're going to direct them, and you've just had a lot of other, let's say, strife with the kid, whatever you tell them is going to, it's not going to work. If you collect yourself and collect them, meaning make the connection with them, go down to their level, get in their face, hey, Habibi, how are you? How's your day? What's this that you're into? What are you doing? Tell me. And they'll go from like to like they want that. They're thirsty for it, right? So you give them this connection, then they're yours. Then you can be like, hey, so after the connection is established, make sure it's established, they've eased, they're looking to you, their heart is open. Then you say, hey, Habibi, what if we looked at it this way? What if we did it this way? You know, and this is dependent on the age of the child, right? If they're in the 7 to 14, you might be able to do a little bit more direction. Whereas if on the other side, you may have to frame it to their developmental stage. But the most important thing is that you have the connection first before the direction. I mean, this is the reality. If you look at the Quran, the rahmah, the ayahs about rahmah are way more than the ayahs about severity and punishment and whatever we want to call it. Like 80% to 20%. So foundation of, and the first, so you look at the Asma Husna. People say there's Jalali names and Jamali names. Well, you know, and however you understand that. But what are the first two names? Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. First, always. And what is the first way that the human being comes into the world? Rahm, through the womb, through mercy. So if we look at, and then the 14 to 21, this is where we want to be, we're still there, we're sort of next to them on their side, sort of like a rafiq, like a companion on the journey with them. And they can come to you, and if you've done that establishing, they'll come to you, and you're not sort of saying, hey, I need you to learn this, but you're sort of, because you've built all that trust, they're coming to you, and then you say, hey, this is what I do, this is what we do, and it's a conversation, and it's going to cement this development for them to be the people that you want them to be. So if we look at an example in this teaching phase, because this is the phase when a lot of people think that's the whole, we're trying to teach our kids from day one to when they're 55, basically, right, or beyond. Always trying to teach them. We have a 7-year window. I tell my own kids this. My daughter turned 14 this year, and I was like, months up to it, I was like, I got to teach you everything I have because that's it. And she's like, no, you can still teach me afterwards. I was like, yeah, but that will be up to you. So I want to make sure that, so we joke about it, but it's a reality. So during this time, what do we teach them? Oftentimes we're teaching behavioral things. We want them to, we're focused on discipline, and we're focused on behavior, and we try to reward them for good behavior, which is a problem, and we'll talk about that. It can be a problem. But they're open at this age to learn about Allah, to learn about philosophical, theological concepts. We can't keep these things from them because this is the time when they're going to start to understand their relationship to themselves and to Allah. And here's an example of this. In a hadith, the Prophet said to Abdullah ibn Abbas, who was 12 years old at the time, so in this window of teaching, he says, be mindful of Allah and Allah will be mindful of you. Be mindful of Allah and you shall find Him with you. When you ask Allah, and if you seek help, rely upon Allah. How many people have these kinds of conversations with their 12-year-old? Usually it's about disciplining them and telling them to do homework and talking about behaviors that we need them to do. But we really need to be talking to them about their understanding of Allah, because this is going to be what is going to make them successful. True success in dunya and akhirah, not just academic success, financial success. We need to equip them with the tools to know who they are and where they stand. And you may be saying, well, I myself don't even know the answers to these questions, right? And this is why everything we're talking about this in this context and Cambridge Muslim College, and why this is important, is to understand the theological reality of how we understand God, how we understand ourselves in relationship to God, and how that affects us in the world, but making it practical, making it, how do we translate that into, all of us need that knowledge. It's not just for scholars. So this is a point I want to drive home, and I will throughout this talk, is the parent-child relationship is the blueprint for the relationship to God, self, and society. Meaning, the experience that the child has with you, the amount of safety and love and compassion and attachment that they have with you, is going to determine and affect their own relationship with Allah, because when we come into the world, we are with Allah before this world, then we're veiled to it, and we're left with looking to human beings to take care of us and to provide for us. When really, always, it's Allah doing the providing. Allah is Al-Wadud, Allah is Ar-Rahman, Allah is Ar-Rahim. But we're looking to our parents for all of these Asma al-Husna, essentially. And so, if that gets damaged from the parent-child relationship, that's also going to damage the person's relationship with Allah. This is a model that I produced from my research. I'm not going to go into breaking it down. You can find it in this article at the bottom. But essentially, what I want to focus on here is understanding the self, understanding the dynamics of the nafs, and this, how our notion of self is impacted and impressed upon in our experience in this life. So what I want you to recognize is that in our understanding of ourself, from an Islamic perspective, it is before we were born and after we die is our full trajectory of the self. It's not just the self that we understand that is projected in the world, that is a separate identity and separate self. We have this ruh within us that is directly connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that goes back to before we came into this world, all of the souls, Allah said, Alastu bi rabbikum, am I not your Lord? And all of the souls said, Bala, shahidna. For certainly we witness the reality, meaning our soul is completely in witnessing of the reality of Tawheed, the reality of Allah, and our reliance upon Allah. And then what happens is we come into this world and that's veiled from us. And when it's veiled from us, as a baby, we then are set up to need human beings to fulfill our needs. But if you've ever been around a baby, they're pure. They have this pure heart and they're ready to just trust anybody. And they're sort of like, because they've just come from this plane of alast, and they're pure. And day by day, in this dunya, and with us damaged souls taking care of them, they start to get further away from that purity and start to cover over that ruh and identify with the nafs, identify with the sense of ourself as separate beings. When our reality is that we are connected to Allah and that we have this reality of witnessing the Tawheed. And so what happens is, if we look at The qalb is the center of ourself, the heart, and it is impacted by our experiences in the world. The Prophet ﷺ said that the qalb is like a bubbling pot of water. It has these bubbles that come to the surface when we interact and engage with the world, when we have experiences, our nafs fluctuates and our heart reacts. And the ruh is this pure aspect of ourself that always exists, but our nafs is this part of ourself that exists in this dunya, where we see ourselves as separate, we see things as cause and effect, we're sort of veiled, we're very veiled from the reality of Allah's tawheed, and we start to think in duality. And we start to think, I'm responsible for my own destiny, I have willpower, and we have a really hard time figuring this out. And what's in this, the baby's state of having access, their heart is pure at this point. Nothing's happened yet when the baby's born to veil them and sort of cover over their heart from this truth of their ruh. But then, when we come into this world and our parents or our caretakers, they are starting to imprint on us a experience of covering over. So let's say, for example, a baby is innocently playing on the rug on a brand new white carpet that was just purchased by their parents, and they're very proud of it, and it's very expensive, and he's drinking grape juice. Poor miskeen baby innocently spills the juice while he's playing, and the father just came home from a busy day at work, was stuck in traffic, good man, really trying to be the best Muslim, best father he can be, but he yells, "Ah, what did you do?" The baby, who's open-hearted and pure, in that moment it goes, I'm safe, I'm loved, I'm okay, to maybe I'm not safe, I don't have access to love, I'm judged, I'm not, right? This whole experience of, I'm not fully accepted and loved and held. And so what happens is we cover over in our hearts. We do this little sort of constriction. And this creates this little like black spot on our heart. So when we know in the Quran, Allah talks about the heart getting rust on the heart, right? And eventually the heart can be hardened from all this accumulation of staying with the separation. We think of these black spots only sometimes as transgression or sin. It can be from that too, when you're consciously removing yourself from Allah, but also when we have experiences where we forget, where we have this experience, I'm now reliant on my parents for love and compassion and mercy, right? But my parents can't hold the reality of Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. Only Allah can hold that full picture of that mercy and compassion that I need as a human being. It's flawed in the parents. But as a baby, I'm attached to and I'm looking for this imprint on the parent. There's all kinds of science and study how the baby imprints on the mother. And so in that moment, we cover over the sense that I'm safe with Allah. And so imagine this is one incident. Day by day by day, these little things, they start to build up. And they start to cover over, right? Cover over the heart. Now, again, we think as parents, oh my goodness, the responsibility. I'm thinking back, like I've damaged my child. Certainly, we've damaged our children. I'm conscious of this, and I'm constantly trying to implement this, and I know I hurt my kids. I'm frustrated, I say things, right? But what I've, in realizing this, what I've learned to do and what I try to do, and this is where the self-awareness comes in as a parent, is we have the opportunity to fix it before it stays there. Usually what happens is these just get accumulated to the point where it can become this hardened thing. And then this light that would usually shine from this connection to Allah, the direct access to love and compassion and mercy, right? It gets covered over, and it can't come through and shine on the nafs, purify the nafs, like this. But so in order to do that, we need to remove these coverings on our heart. So we as human beings on our own, without having parents now, we've grown up on our own, that's a lot of work. That's the work I do as a psychologist in Islamic psychotherapy, is I'm trying to go in and help them find the places where they've covered over from traumatic experiences in life, open to them, be with them, let them open, and be with Allah. Allow the remembrance of Allah to come and transform that. But now, before getting there, as parents, we have the opportunity to save them from having to go to therapy so much. And there's nothing wrong. Everybody should seek help. But the more we can, the less of these things, the better. So imagine, this one thing happens. Now what I do, if I'm conscious and I'm aware, as soon as I say something to my child and I see them go, oh, daddy, and they go from like happy and playful to restricted, sad, and feeling disconnected from me, I try to take a breath, realize what I've just done, and then sometimes if I try to do it immediately, sometimes I maybe need to cool off, but then I come back and I hug them and I put my heart to their heart. I kiss them on the forehead and I say, I apologize, and I say, I'm here, I love you. And sometimes I even put their hand on their heart, breathe with them, and say Allah. I'm reconnecting them to, like, I'm here for you, but also I'm reminding it's not just me, because I'm not going to always be here for them. But now what they're doing is they're imprinting the safety with me, and what I'm trying to do is connect that to Allah. So that, yes, I'm here, but I'm essentially a stand-in for this need to be connected to love and compassion and mercy, which they can always access through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so if we invite and evoke this self-conscious parenting, we can save our kids from not only having more issues when they grow up, but having a stronger connection with Allah through their connection and attachment to us. So, this idea of attachment, and I would recommend, and I'll give you some reading recommendations on attachment parenting. It's very good. It's a very good model. Like I said, but we need to add the notion that why is it important to attach? The end point is not just the attachment of the parent. It is ultimately wanting them to be attached and surrendered and submitted to Allah. And so this attachment between the child and the parent, it arranges the parent and child hierarchy, meaning not hierarchy and we dominate over our children, but we have to be the guide for them. They don't know. They haven't had life experience. They don't have all that they need. They need guidance, just like we need the Quran and the Sunnah. So it creates the safety of them to be able to take guidance from you, because you've built this sense of attachment and reliance. And that creates this natural order of just your natural parenting instincts come out. You don't need to learn parenting techniques. You don't need to go to a course to learn how to be a parent. It's naturally in you. But all these other things need to be naturally situated for our fitra to come out. And then the child responds to that. They are naturally going to be taking your lead, taking your guidance. They give you their attention. It keeps this connection, right? Connection meaning heart-to-heart connection. And that, in many ways, has to start with physical connection. But then it transfers into feeling safe and feeling connected. And then we become the model for the child, and that's what we're supposed to be. We're modeling for them. And then the child looks to us for cues rather than looking to their peers or other people that we don't know. what their values are. We don't know where they're going to be, right? If we're not occupying the role of attachment, the child cannot not be attached. It's our nature. So if it's not to you, it's going to be to somebody else. And most likely, it's going to be with their peers in this day and age. And that is a recipe for disaster. And we are always like, I wish my child would be good. You know, you should be good. And it's focused on behavior. If you step back from the commanding of the behavior and you focus on the relationship, the natural tendency of the child is to want to be good for you because they love you, because you have established this foundational love for them. So in the Quran, this is part of an ayah. Oh Allah, allow me to do good that will please you, and allow my children to be righteous. So notice the order of this. Allow me to do good that will please you. So if I'm in a good state and I'm being an embodied Muslim, I'm in a state of Islam, then it allows the child to be righteous, because they are going to look to us as the blueprint. They're going to look to us to follow. And this is not necessarily a Sahih hadith, but the meaning is known to be sound. That Allah, the Prophet said, Allah has mercy on a parent who aids their child in being good to them. So instead of saying, well, my child just never good to me, the child is just miskeen. They came into the world open, and we need to do things in order for them to be good. So we have to take the responsibility of making a good reason for them to want to be good for us, meaning that we're setting the example, and more importantly, that we're just this, like the Prophet, this sort of endless stream of mercy and love for them that's not contingent on them doing a certain thing. If you get good grades, then I'll love you. Right? No, it's just by nature of you being a human being, you're loved and accepted, and I'm here for you. That's what Allah does for us, right? None of us are perfect, and yet Allah is constantly showering us with mercy and telling us that no matter what we do, all we have to do is turn to Him. And He's there with open arms. That's how we need to be as parents. And that's how we're modeling understanding that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is what I really want to drive home, this point. The child's attachment to their parents is the blueprint for their attachment to and relationship with Allah. This is what's more important. So attachment parenting is good, is what I'm saying. It is a good model. But it's for this reason. Because that's the ultimate reality. That's what we're here for as human beings, is to understand our relationship to Allah and come into nearness to Him. To be a servant of Allah. And so creating a Muslim child does not just mean creating somebody who wears a topi and reads Quran or wears hijab. That's external. That's the behavioral. We want a child who is a Abd Allah. And in order to build a child to be a servant of Allah, we have to provide this loving connection of relationship with them. The word muraqabah in Arabic, sometimes people use this word as a meaning meditation, but it means watching the self, watchfulness of the self. And what it is studying yourself and being able to notice your reaction while it's happening. What happens is we don't do that. Usually we're just in autopilot and we sort of see the world externally and we're disconnected from ourselves and our internal, and everything's external, exoteric, right? And so we need to turn inward and watch ourselves. Be aware of what comes up. When my child did this, what was my reaction? And then notice those reactions and do muhasabah. So the muraqabah is in the moment, witnessing it, noticing it. Muhasaba is after it's happened, you're taking note of it, taking account of it. It can help to write it down in a journal, but it can also just be a way of reflecting afterwards. And then be aware of your childhood. So this book that I would recommend, Parenting from the Inside Out, the nice thing about it, it has like exercises that you can do to start to unpack all of this and go, start to realize where some of your reactions as a parent may be stemming from your experience as being parented. And then really, if we recognize this whole picture, the conditions of what this is, it can really change the way that we understand parenting. Because we think we're doing a good job sometime by, hey, my job is to be jalali, to direct them, to change their behavior, to make sure they're being good people doing good. And what we need to shift is, well, let's make sure their being is good, rather than just their doing. The doing comes from the being. But let's make sure that we're modeling from a heart-centered place. And, you have to strive to be your best because this is your responsibility. And this is what Allah has put in as an amana to take care of these children. But be merciful with yourself. Just like Allah is merciful with you, and just like you need to be merciful with your children, you just do your best. You're never going to be perfect, ever. Just try. Just do your best, because Allah has told us that each of us is a shepherd and each of us is responsible for our flock. And that's not just like, hey, this is your problem, buddy, take care of it. It is for you. When you step into this role as basically a steward, we are Khalifatullah. We're supposed to be stewards of the earth, stewards of our family, stewards of whatever Allah puts in our care. And what that does is, by being in this station of a shepherd, it's going to help you. It's going to elevate your walking to Allah and your development as well. There's lots of tips here, but these four that I've put here I think are really fundamental, because they're connected to things that people think are fine and sort of, don't realize that these things can be problematic and that we need to limit them. So often we're so focused on wanting our kids to be good at school and academic, getting good grades and being a doctor or a lawyer, and that's what's going to be successful, and that's what's going to make us feel like we've done our job as good parents. The reality is that they're not going to be tested on their academic prowess in Akhirah. And if our goal is to get them to be balanced and healthy and have a connection with Allah, academic success is not the measure we should be using to drive our parenting. And when we talk about different children having different personalities, some are going to be really good at academic studies, and they're going to have that type of intelligence, and some are not. And that doesn't mean they're less intelligent. It doesn't mean that they're less valuable. You need to understand who your child is and nurture their nature. So understanding what comes natural to them, what has Allah blessed them with that they have as a gift to bring into the world. If we were to put all these people into one box of academic studies, or if the whole world was just doctors and lawyers, it would be a problematic society. We need people of different skills and talents and passions. So nurture who your child is. Don't fit them into who you think they should be. Screen time. I know it's very hard to limit these days, and I know we think oftentimes parents say, well, everybody else is doing it. They're not going to be able to keep up with their friends because they won't know the latest thing, or they're playing the video games, and they need to have that connection with their peers. Don't let the peer culture lead your child's development. Limit screen time. And when I say balance it with emergent experience, meaning if you're going to, this is what I do with my kids. If I say, whatever amount of time you're going to be on a screen, In the same day, you have to do the exact same amount of time doing something either outside, playing outside in nature, or doing some sort of emergent play or emergent activity. Meaning, it's not, so people say, oh, play, fine, we're playing video games. We play video games, so it must be play. It doesn't count as play because it's always oriented towards scoring or winning. There's an outcome. Children need to, and teens need to be just in an experience of engagement that isn't tied to an outcome. That's what play is. It's just experiencing and having things emerge, and you're interacting and you're engaging and you're experiencing the awe of Allah's natural world and creation, and that's healthy. So if they're going to be on screens in whatever form, make sure that they're also engaging with human beings or nature and playing. Limit rewarding behavior. I know this is something that we think is a good thing, but it's not always bad, but it should be limited, because what it does, it sets us up for the child's going to do it for the reward. It's like classic conditional. Children aren't animals. We're not trying to get them to behave in a certain way. We want them to be a certain way. And so we need them to understand that they're deserving of love regardless of what they accomplish or do. And so we need to be, like, if you reward them, it should be for no reason. It should just be for them existing. Here's a reward because I love you so much and you're so wonderful. Not because you did good on this exam or you achieved this, or, right? And the more that you do that, the more you're training them to do it for the behavior, you're for the reward. And so it's actually not really working for what you think it's working for. Limit peer communication. I know this is also tough. People think, oh, that's how they get socialized. They need to be with their peers. That's healthy. Not really. It's healthy to a degree, but who the peers are and how they're interacting makes all the difference. And if you're not regulating that and you don't know who they're interacting with and you don't know their parents, then it's like sending them into the lion's den, especially in these days. We have to limit it. So if we're talking about drawing boundaries, absolutely. Draw boundaries on how and who and when they hang out with their friends. And the texting with, limit that. Even if they're texting with people you approve of, you know their parents, they're part of, get them to come over to your house and engage with the adults in the house and do things together, right? You want to basically make adults around as much as possible. Not to monitor them and change their behavior, but just to be examples of maturity. And if we think of the 777, yes, that's developmental stages, but it should also be in every interaction. It's the play, like the connection before direction, right? So connection, then direction, then, or it's like connection, maturation, socialization. We always jump to the socialization. Be this, do this, right? But you have to do these other things first. And so involve your children and their peers in that way, and try to limit just them communicating on their own. All right, so now I've put these tips, and they're on your handout, in God, self, and society. So five tips for God, 5 tips for self, 5 tips for society. So again, the remembering this idea that the attaching to you is a blueprint for Allah. Teach them Iman and Ihsan, not just Islam. Meaning, don't just drop them off to the masjid so that they learn Quran and know how to pray. That's important. But they also need to know belief. They need to understand Aqidah. They need to understand how their relationship with Allah is and how that works and who they are in the world based on this. And Ihsan, meaning they need to be engaged in self-awareness and trying to perfect the self and have good character, akhlaq. This is part of the whole package. It can't just be the exoteric aspect of Islam. The Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam would consult their children. We often don't do this. We think, oh, well, I'm the boss, you don't know, and why? And almost like if I consult my children, it's changing the hierarchy. No, you're not taking direction from them. You're consulting them. When you consult them, it makes them feel a part of this connection, this attachment. It's going to help them trust you. It's building that, and you're honoring them. You're creating this respect, and it's sunnah. Make dua for your children. Yes, for them to have good things, because Allah can help your children, but for you, the more you make dua for your children, the more it reminds you that it's Allah that's responsible for their destiny. It's Allah that's responsible for their development. We as parents forget that sometimes, and we think it's my responsibility that they become what they're going to become. And yes, we have a lot of influence on that, but it's not. It's Allah that's in control of it. So remind yourself of that and know that your job is just to steward. The outcome is in Allah's hands. And then be merciful. This is fundamental. In the way that Allah is merciful with you, you have to be merciful with yourself and with your children. So now the self, like I said, reflect on your own childhood, be self-aware, build self-esteem, and encourage self-knowledge. So self-esteem is not, oftentimes self-esteem is based on, especially nowadays with Instagram, and they're looking to validation for what they look like and what they do. It's again, behavioral. Self-esteem is really based in valuing themselves for who they actually are, and knowing, and that is based in self-knowledge. And what I mean by self-knowledge is, knowing about yourself, the nafs, but also what we really are. We're slaves of Allah. We're servants of Allah. We have this connection to Allah. We're souls. That's our identity. More than I'm from this neighborhood, I'm Pakistani, I like this food, I'm going to be a doctor. There's a deeper identity they need to connect with. Help your children honor and respect you. That doesn't mean, hey, honor me and respect me. It means help them, meaning be honorable, be respectful. Then they will honor and respect you. Spend time alone with each child separately. This is very, very important. Again, they each have different personalities. They need one-to-one connection. So, if you have lots of children, it's more difficult, but it's not any less important. So you have to create the time to have one-on-one. I have daddy-daughter dates and daddy-son dates, and I sort of rotate it, and we do different things based on what the child likes to do. And again, because of that, adapt it to fit the personality of the child. So you're looking at the self of the child, understanding, and not just using a one-size-fits-all approach. And then finally, for the society theme, help your children choose their friends. I know that sounds difficult, and they probably wouldn't want to hear this, and you don't have to tell them this. You can be creative and subtle about it, but essentially, if you don't know their friends, get to know them, invite them, say, if you're going to hang out with this person, they need to come over and have dinner with us. You should be having dinner together as a family. This is the bottom one, establishing family traditions. Very, very, very important. And bring the friends into that. Don't just have them go have a sleepover and you never meet them. Don't have them come over and go into their room the whole time. Tell them to do the activity in the family area. Be together. Engage with their friends. Make their friends feel comfortable, and then meet their parents. And if you don't have similar values to the parents, try to get them to find new friends. Give teens responsibility, really important. They're at that age in between, after age 14, they need to feel independent, and you shouldn't be worried about, we don't want to try to make them independent. We want them to be dependent on you. Then the independence will happen naturally. There's more about that in the handout. And then don't encourage them to fit in. That's oftentimes parents are like worried that they need to fit in their environment among peers, or maybe because they go to school and everyone else isn't Muslim and you don't want to stand out too much, right? So don't tell anybody you're fasting, or don't maybe eat whatever everyone else is eating. Don't go down that road. It's fine if they don't fit in. It's better that they don't fit in. Better that they're strangers to their peers at school, because then they're going to you want them to know who they are when they're interacting with peers. And what happens is, if they're so focused on fitting in, they lose a sense of self, they lose a connection to the family and the guidance and the values, and they just are going to be oriented towards their peers. And so don't worry about children being awkward. Don't worry about them not fitting in. Don't worry about them being shy. It's better to be shy. Haya, right? It's humble, modesty, withheld a little bit. This is good. And some children are just less shy than others, fine, but try to regulate that imbalance. And then be who you want them to be in the world. You're, again, the model. Don't just say, hey, I want you to be this. Look at, when you point the finger, 3 are pointed back at you. Are you doing that? If you're upset that your child isn't praying and they never see you pray, there's not anything you should be upset about. And really establish family traditions. I can't say this enough. Like, create your own traditions. It doesn't have to be tradition. You create them. My wife is really great at this. During Ramadan, we for the last 10 days, we've set up a tent in our living room, and we all do ihtikaf. We all sleep in there at night, and we have this, all throughout Ramadan, we have a prayer jar, and we put in it the names of everybody we can think of that we know, and every night, each child picks a thing from the jar, a name, and then they have to make dua for that person. And it's become this tradition that we do. The kids love it. They look forward to it. It's taught them to care about other people. They make incredible duas now for people. And it's like they're intuiting what the person's heart needs. And these type of things are really important. And these are the 2 books that I mentioned that I recommend. Again, I find that most of what's in here is sound. I would just say, you're going to have to insert this, Allah, the awareness of what the ultimate goal is. And inshallah, I'll write a book on parenting someday.